You walk each day across solid ground. It feels stable, assured, a quiet partner beneath your steps. But under the soles of your feet, the earth is not still, not truly. Beneath the concrete, beneath the soil and roots, deeper than even the deepest caves, there lies a vast mosaic of colossal plates, slow-moving islands of rock that cradle continents and oceans. They do not hurry. They drift, inches a year, slower than your fingernails grow. But they move, patiently, perpetually, shaping the face of the planet as they go. This dance of rock has no music we can hear, yet the motions are as rhythmic as a breath. In, out, push, pull, lift, sink. These are the movements of tectonic plates, the enormous slabs of crust and mantle that form the shell of our world. You can think of them like lily pads floating on a pond, except the lily pads are made of stone, and the pond beneath them is molten, dense, and unimaginably deep. Every continent, from the icy edges of Antarctica to the sun-warmed deserts of Africa, rides upon these vast stone rafts. But the surface we live on, the crust, is so quiet in its movement that it's easy to forget it's in motion at all. And yet the earth is not a solid, sleeping thing. It is more like a slow, breathing being, one whose inhalations and exhalations take millions of years. You cannot feel it now, in your bed, in your home. But even while you rest, the ground under your town is shifting. Quietly, gently, without rush or fanfare. If you could see time the way plate tectonics does, not in months, but in millennia, you'd see mountains rise and crumble, like sandcastles. You'd see oceans open wide like yawns, and then slowly tighten into seas again. You'd watch continents stretch and separate, collide and embrace, in cycles so patient. They mimic the breath of a sleeping colossus. No part of the planet is separate from this slow drift. The earth beneath your pillow once belonged to a different continent. It has moved, in secret, over eons. The sandstone of your canyon, the granite in your kitchen tops, even the beach you remember from childhood, all were carried here by this motion. Nothing is fixed. Even the oldest stones remember movement. Beneath you now, perhaps 10 to 70 kilometers below, lies the boundary between crust and mantle, a place called the Mohorovizic discontinuity, or simply the MOHO. That is not a wall, not a cliff or bright line, as maps pretend. It is a soft change, a deep shift in density, where the brittle crust gives way to rock warm enough to flow slowly over time. And within the mantle beneath that, the earth becomes nearly alive with motion. Warmth from Earth's core, that leftover heat from planetary birth, creates slow, swirling currents. These convection cells are like the breath beneath breath, a deep, invisible stirring that propels entire continents on their patient way. They do not rush. They simply rise and fall, trading places over ages. Like the tides of a secret ocean made of stone. You might wonder, if the earth moves so much, why don't we feel it? Why does our world feel so quietly still? Because the rhythm is gentle. Life is brief, and the earth is kind in its pacing. Imagine standing on a glacier, so large you cannot see its ends. All around you seems still. But months later, looking back, you'd see its moved, shifted, changed posture. That's the crust of the earth. That's you, riding on a plate, always in motion even in your dreams. And sometimes, just sometimes, the earth lets us hear its shifting breath, trembling of ground, a quiver in a mountain's base. An unexpected cracking where two plates resist and then resolve. But four. Now, tonight, those movements are subtle, a warmth rolling far beneath, a patient drift toward a distant future. You might rest here, feeling that hidden motion, not as a danger, but as a deep lullaby that the planet beneath you is alive. That aliveness is not chaos, but rhythm. Time, in geologic terms, is soft and wide. There is no race, only continuity, only cycles, just as your chest gently lifts and falls as you breathe in sleep. The earth, too, expands and contracts in its own way. A rise here, a subduction there, a crack forming along a fault. Ridge stretching slowly underwater. The continents are not hurried. They trust their path across the face of the world like dreams, moving slowly through sleep. And you are part of all this. You always have been, since before there were cities. Before names. Before borders. The atoms in your bones once sat locked in stone on ancient supercontinents. They've traveled under oceans, lifted through mountains. They've swum in magma and waded inside silent hills. You are more earth than you think, more movement than stillness. And so, as you lie in the stillness of this night, know that the earth beneath you is alive, not fast, not loud, but steady. Breathing. Shifting. Becoming. And where does this breath go? Which direction do the plates choose? What happens when they meet or part? That is a journey for the next chapter, when we listen closely to the earth's broken crust and learn how its cracks were never flaws, but invitations to movement. It's easy to imagine the earth as seamless, a spotless marble floating through space, round and whole. But if you could peel back the oceans and lift the forests, if all the water and trees and cities disappeared for a moment, you'd see the truth beneath. The earth is not whole. It is cracked, fragmented, divided into pieces. And yet, it isn't broken. It is balanced in its brokenness, like an eggshell. The surface of the earth is a jigsaw of giant fragments. These fragments are called tectonic plates, massive, rigid pieces of the earth's crust and upper mantle that fit together, like puzzle pieces too big to grasp. Some are as large as whole continents. Others are smaller, tucked between giants, shifting quietly, their edges brushing and gliding, grinding or stretching. There are 7 major plates, and dozens of smaller ones. The Eurasian plate, its icy edge brushing against the Arctic. The African plate, cradle of ancient deserts and deep lakes. The Pacific plate, roaming beneath waves and volcanic chains. These plates aren't nailed down. They float atop a layer called the asthenosphere, a weaker, ductile part of the upper mantle, warm enough to move, soft enough to flow, stronger than water, slower than tar. This layer isn't liquid, not quite, but it allows the plates above to drift, slowly, gently, in a constant, gradual waltz. From above, satellite images of Earth don't show the cracks, but beneath every ocean, behind every mountain range, those invisible lines tell stories of continents drifting apart, of new land birthing from fire, of old crust diving back into the deep earth, to be remade. We call these divisions plate boundaries, and in each crack lies a different kind of movement, a different temperament. Some plates diverge, pulling slowly away from each other, making space for newborn crust to rise like fresh breath. Others converge, colliding, their edges folding and thrusting upward to form mountain ranges. Still others slide past one another in silence, until the silence is broken by tension released. Earthquakes, like sighs from the strained earth. These cracks aren't mistakes. They're the marks of a planet alive, like the branching lines on your palm, or the creases that form when you smile. These boundaries are signs of motion, of memory, of life continuing in slow eloquence. There is beauty in the way these imperfections govern the rhythm of the world. Sometimes the boundary between plates lies beneath a chain of mountains, tall, quiet, sleeping giants made from ages of pressure. Sometimes it lies far below the sea, where molten rock seeps and cools, slowly knitting new earth at the ocean's cores. Sometimes these plate junctions create deep trenches in the ocean floor, so deep, so silent, they feel like the earth's own hidden thoughts. There's something poetic about a shell that's cracked but stable. In its fragmented design, there is movement, And in movement, there is equilibrium, because if the Earth's crust were whole and unbroken, there would be no mountains to climb, no volcanoes to shape the land, no tremor to remind us of the deep and shifting world below. Every island you've seen on a map, every coastline, every inland sea has been drawn and redrawn by the fury and gentleness that shifting plates dot. Even the world you call home, your neighborhood, your city, sits upon one of these ancient fragments. And whether it floats atop the African, Australian, or North American plate, it is always moving. Slowly, yes, but surely, Dot. And if you stood above the earth, not for years, but for ages, looking down with patient eyes not confined by a human clock, you would see these plates flow like slow rivers of stone. You'd see Africa drifting northward toward Europe. You'd see the Atlantic Ocean growing wider, inch by inch. You'd see India rising like a great raft, crashing into Asia, lifting the Himalayas higher with every quiet collision. The cracks remind us that permanence is an illusion, that solid ground is not still. It is changing always. Change is not chaos, but a kind of harmony. Dot. It is deeply strange and deeply comforting to imagine the earth itself is not a rigid sphere, but a breathing, shifting being, like an enormous organism whose skin divides and flows, not in pain, but in expression. Each crack a decision, each drift a sentence in the long story of a living planet. So tonight, as you rest above one of these drifting plates, feel not the fear of movement, but the peace of being part of something ancient and vast, a world that holds itself together, not by being whole, but by embracing the space between its pieces. The cracked crust is not broken, it is simply free. And in the spaces between those plates, something else stirs, a powerful current of molten rock and ancient heat-carrying continents across the surface like weathered ships at sea. But what is this force? What lies beneath the puzzle of crust that makes it move at all? That warmth, that slow, churning breath of fire, is what we'll gently explore in the next chapter. Your feet stand on solid ground. But below this quiet surface, far beneath soils and bedrock, something moves, something warm, ancient, and alive with flow. You cannot see it, you cannot hear it, but it breathes. It doesn't breathe like we do, with lungs or oxygen, but still there is a rhythm here, a pulse beneath the lithosphere, soft and steady, slow and strong. These are the mantle currents, the secret rivers of hot, softened rock that curl and rise beneath the crust, lifting whole continents on their backs, carrying ocean floors toward trenches, pulling the skin of the earth into quiet, ceaseless motion. Imagine stirring a pot of thick soup on a low flame. The warmth rises from the bottom, cools as it nears the surface, and then falls again. A gentle, endless cycle. This is how convection works. And Earth's mantle convection behaves in much the same way. Only, the soup is made of rock. And the stirring takes tens of millions of years. The mantle, Earth's middle layer, tucked between the outer crust and the blazing inner core, isn't liquid like lava. It's solid, but just warm and soft enough to move over immense spans of time. Like a candle's wax that softens in heat, but doesn't drip. This medium, part solid, part soul, slips and flows slowly, carrying with it the hard shell of the earth above. These slow-turning currents are born from heat, not the gentleness of sun-warmed stone, but the fierce internal fire that has lived inside Earth since its very birth. This is primordial heat, the energy left over from the planet's violent formation and the decay of radioactive elements deep in the core. Tiny particles decay. Atoms break down. And with each change, they release a whisper of warmth, thousands of miles beneath your resting body. Those whispers gather into warmth. And warmth gathers into motion. And that motion, over long enough time, moves continents. Where the heat gathers and rises, The crust above is gently stretched, like bread rising from within. Here, tectonic. Plates are pulled apart, and newborn crust emerges from mid-ocean ridges. Where the mantle cools and sinks, the crust above is gently dragged down, plunged into the deep abysses of subduction zones, where one plate dives beneath another and melts into the dark body of the planet. Again, up and down, in and out. A cycle of deep earth breath. You ride a tectonic plate, the way a leaf rides an ocean current. The leaf doesn't see the water move. It simply drifts, following bends and swells it cannot feel or name. So too, the continents drift above the Earth's molten tide. The supercontinent Pangaea, once joined in a prehistoric embrace, broke apart under the long persuasion of these currents. And now its children, Africa, South America, Europe, Asia, are still drifting apart, like leaves losing sight of one another in a slow, bittersweet stream. India, once an island near Africa, floated north on a slow, warm current, traveling thousands of kilometers in silent resolve until it kissed Asia and lifted the Himalayan peaks skyward. Australia drifts even now toward Southeast Asia. Slowly and calmly, soon by the planet's clock, it will find a new place in the landscape of the world. And the Atlantic, that enormous stretch of salt and tide, grows wider each year by the width of your thumb. As the plates on either side are pushed gently apart by the heat moved. Seafloor below. Time is the ocean in which all of this swims, and the Earth doesn't. Fret. It knows how to wait. Easy to imagine the land beneath you as firm, permanent, but it's riding a very steady breath. You are not only of the Earth, you are on it, carried across millennia by invisible waves of heat below. And the energy of convection does not scream. It flows like thought, like memory, quiet and persistent. Sometimes it surges upward in broken plumes, columns of heat called mantle plumes, rising to feed giant hotspots on the surface like the Hawaiian Islands, which bubble one by one to life as the crust moves. Slowly over that fixed breath of warmth. Picture a conveyor belt tucked beneath the Earth's skin, running on fire and ancient silence. This is what carries whole continents slowly, not in chaos. But in choreography, the plates above aren't acting of their own power. They are passengers. Even earthquakes and volcanic blasts, which feel violent to us, are just small, loud exhalations from a deep, quiet engine. And as you lie still now, you are more than a witness to this long, patient current. You are part of it. The calcium in your teeth came from particles once scattered across ancient seafloors. The iron in your blood may have passed through rock melted by a mantle plume. You are composed, in small beautiful ways, of minerals shaped by the slow turning of Earth's heart. The deeper you go in thought, the more you find this connection. That the movement below, though too slow to feel, is part of your own belonging here. In this movement, the crust is not fighting with the mantle. There is no struggle. There is only exchange. Energy, rising and falling. Heat, giving way to motion. Motion giving rise to geography. Geography shaping ecosystems. And ecosystems, nurturing life. From fire comes flow. From flow comes form. And from form, all the stories of life emerge. The paths that animals walk, the migration of seeds, the places we call home. So, the continents drift, not because they choose to move, but because they are held by these gentle, molten arms. The next time you walk across land, pause for a moment. Imagine the warmth below. Pressing gently upward. Feel the unseen current beneath your steps. And know that the solid ground you trust is only as solid as the heat beneath it allows it to be. This is Earth's quiet fire, not the fire of destruction, but the fire of presence and direction. It is the breath within stone. And from this breath, the plates move, and from that movement they meet. Some drift apart, some collide. Some hold hands in passing, but in their meeting places, in those boundaries deep in the crust, the earth tells different stories. And perhaps the next story to explore ... is what happens when plates do not flee from one another, but move into an embrace, rising, folding, breaking, and building a world of peaks, a world of slow collisions. Not all movement is collision. Not all motion is loud. Sometimes, in the deep silence of the ocean floor, the earth stretches gently, pulling itself apart with careful grace. This is the story of divergent boundaries, where tectonic plates part, ways ever so slowly, not in anger, not in haste, but with the poise of a lasting dance, and in that parting, something ancient and new is born. Deep beneath the sea, where light barely lingers and silence wraps everything like a soft blanket, there lies a continuous wound, not of pain, but of creation. It is the mid-ocean ridge, an underwater mountain range that encircles the globe like a seam on a leather-wrapped sphere. But this seam does not seal. It opens. Here, two tectonic plates move away from each other, just millimeters each year, but consistently. Gracefully. Like the slow unfurling of a story. As they separate, they leave a gap, a space where the earth reveals its glow from within. From the mantle below, molten rock, magma, rises. It meets the cold ocean water, hardens into new crust, and expands the ocean floor outward, piece by piece. A process called seafloor spreading, an invisible, continual exhale of stone. This, you see, is how oceans are born. The Atlantic Ocean, so wide now with waves and wind, once did not exist. It was simply a silent crack between two drifting continents, a small rift, born of separation. But it widened. Centimeter by centimeter. Year after year. And now it is vast, a slow breath that has lasted over 180 million years, and it is still breathing, still growing, each day. Molten rock slowly rises from beneath the mid-Atlantic ridge, cools into basalt, the dark foundation of the ocean crust, and pushes the old seafloor outward, toward the Americas on one side, and toward Europe and Africa on the other. Imagine this like a zipper being undone, but instead of teeth pulling apart, the seam grows longer. Not to open, but to offer. To create. The plates that border this ridge, like the North American plate and the Eurasian plate, or the South American plate and the African plate, they glide away from the ridge's spine bit by bit, riding on mantle currents from below. And while you may not feel this silent growth, your world is subtly reshaping with each breath of molten stone. Rifts don't only occur underwater. Sometimes this divergence happens on land. One such place is the East African Rift, a great valley where the earth is slowly tearing itself apart. One day, millions of years in the future, that rift may birth a new ocean as the land between the cracks sinks lower and lets in the sea. Even now, as you read this, tiny earthquakes flicker beneath that land, signs of the effort it takes for a continent to divide. But nothing in this process is rushed. Nothing panics. The earth moves by its own scale of time. Slow, deliberate, patient. Imagine two dancers standing close, their fingertips brushing, and then, over a lifetime, they drift gently apart. Between them, the floor is rewritten. A path is formed, and through that slender space, something new begins to exist. This is the nature of divergence. It is quiet creation. It is movement without violence. And yet, even in its gentleness, it reshapes the planet. Mountains rise under the sea as new crust forms. Thermal vents open, like chimneys releasing warm whispers from Earth's inner fire. Around these vents, life flourishes in ways unexpected. Tube worms, blind shrimp, gardens of bacteria, thriving not on sunlight, but on minerals and heat. Whole ecosystems born in the rift spaces of the earth. creatures that never see the sky, but pulse with the same elemental rhythm. This, too, is part of the story of divergence. A story not just about rocks and movement, but about possibility and evolution. The Earth splits, but in the space made by parting, life appears. So when you think of division, you could also think of making room. Separation here is not destruction, but transformation. And the ridges beneath the ocean, though hidden, are among the most dynamic places on Earth. They are the planet's birthplaces, the lines where future continents begin to shape, long before we name them, see them, or set foot upon them. Tonight, you may imagine those long ridge lines, far beneath salt and silence, glowing faintly with magma, cooling into dark stone. You may imagine continents slipping quietly apart, not with fanfare, but with purpose. And you, carried along for the ride, because this journey, this planetary breath includes you, your streets, your skies, your dreams, drifting quietly on plates that parted from their partner hundreds of millions of years ago. Now, from divergence, we step toward something different. If some plates pull away from each other, what of the ones that move toward one another? What happens when massive crusts embrace, with nowhere left to go but up? Perhaps then, the next rhythm of this journey is one of raising of colliding plates, and the grand peaks that rise from slow, ancient pressure. The next movement is one of mountains. Sometimes, the Earth does not pull apart. Sometimes it moves in close, two massive crustal plates, drifting upon the quiet tide of the mantle meet. And when they do, neither steps aside, they press, they lean into one another, stone against stone. Continent against continent, not as an argument, but as an ancient agreement. And from that slow, deep pressure, something magnificent happens. The Earth folds. The Earth rises. Mountains are born. This is what happens when tectonic plates converge, when the slow breath of the planet inhales, and its surface lifts skyward. Picture a long sheet of cloth being gently pushed from both ends, but it crumples, creases, forms peaks and folds. And now imagine that sheet is made of stone. Imagine it moves so slowly that you'd need millions of years to watch it take shape. And yet, one day, you'd find mountains standing where a flat plain once lay. That is the patience of plate, convergence. And nowhere is that story told more clearly than in the towering rise of the Himalaya mountains. Once upon a time, not in fairy tales, but in the frameworks of deep time, a landmass called India was not part of Asia. It was its own plate, far south across the warm waters of a disappearing ocean called the Tethys Sea. Bit by bit, day after day, driven by the slow engine of mantle convection, the Indian plate moved northward. It crossed hundreds of miles in tens of millions of years, approaching, slowly, the Eurasian plate like a vast ship gliding across a molten tide. And then, it met resistance. Two vast plates, both buoyant and thick, both unyielding. Collided. But neither could sink beneath the other. So they rose, like paper crumpling gently in slow motion. The crust buckled and folded, and was pushed skyward, forming the mightiest mountain range on Earth. The Himalayas began to rise, and they still do. Even now, as you dream, Mount Everest is lifting skyward just a few millimeters each year. A mountain breathing upward, one slow exhale at a time. The Himalayas are young in geological time. Sharp, jagged, steep. Still full of the energy of their collision. In contrast, the Appalachians, once just as tall, are much older, worn by time and softened by rain. Yet they, too, were formed in a similar wavy, ancient tectonic collisions, long erased from the surface. Maps of memory. What happens when plates converge is not just vertical. The crust doesn't only fold and lift sometimes. It slides deep beneath the other. This process is called subduction, and though it leads to different kinds of mountain building than continent-to-continent collisions, It too creates ridges and arcs of uplift, often accompanied by volcanoes, as the sinking crust melts below the surface. In the case of continental collision, what's built is made of thick, stubborn granite and metamorphosed stone. Here, no ocean dives downward, no magma rises in ribbons. Instead, the land simply folds tighter. Compresses. Lifts. With every earthquake, with every inch of uplift, the range becomes more expressive, a ridge of time, carved over eternity. And in those folded layers of rock lies the memory of oceans, the imprint of coral reefs, a ghost of seafloor that once lay below. Even the highest peaks hold fossils, proof that these stones, now kissed by wind and sky, were once at the bottom of warm, shallow seas. Can you imagine how slowly and completely the earth rewrites itself? In your lifetime, you may never feel the shifting of such plates. You may climb mountains that seem eternal, but they are not. They are still in motion, still part of Earth's deep negotiation with itself. Stand in the shadow of a mountain range, and know you stand in the echo of two massive bodies meeting without yield. Earth pushes upward, so that sky can rest upon stone, and valley rests beside ridge like a quiet breath drawn through land. Even as you sleep tonight, these converging plates are shifting fractions of millimeters. Pressure builds quietly beneath them. The crust crackles, resettles. Rocks deep below bend without breaking. It is a conversation without end. Sometimes we hear the tension released in low, rumbling earthquakes, or sudden bursts of movement known as thrust faulting. But mostly it is calm. Relentless. Reverent. You see this folding not just in mountains, but in landscapes that seem tilted, straight as stacked. Like leaning books. Hills that roll into rugged uplifts, rivers that flow through deep, V-shaped valleys, cutting into raised crust that once lay flat. When we map mountains, we're really mapping a memory, the results of long-forgotten plate collisions preserved in stone. And across the world, you'll find different versions of this same tale. The Andes, where the South American plate meets the dense oceanic crust of the Nazca Plate, are lifted skyward by subduction beneath the west coast of South America. The Alps, where Africa and Europe press gently together, beautiful clash-yielding alpine peaks traced in snow and time. The Zagros Mountains. The Caucasus, even small island arcs that feel like stepping stones across oceans, all sculpted by the pull and press of colliding plates. The earth lifting itself into shape. In these zones of convergence, geologists see not just terrain, but stories. Histories written in folds and faults. To read these landscapes is to remember that nothing is truly still, not even the mountains. They seem eternal, but they are pages in motion, and they too will be worn down, weathered, and returned one day to the seas. The earth begins again. From collision comes form. From pressure comes height. From the meeting of continents comes the awe of altitude. Can think of mountains as Earth's exhalations, where the crust, under great pressure, rises to release tension. Not quickly, not violently, but steadily. Like continents sighing upward, constructing bridges to the clouds. And isn't it extraordinary that something so tall, so massive, so immovable by human hands, can be born of nothing more than slow drift and unrelenting, quiet pressure? You may never see a mountain rise. You may never feel the crust beneath your feet press upward. But it does. And somewhere, far beneath the surface, two plates are still holding each other in a timeless, patient push. The land remembers where it's been pressed. And the stones, in their silence, still rise. But not all boundaries fold upward. Some trace quiet fault lines, and instead of embracing or parting, they slip side by side, like dancers passing in parallel. Our journey next will follow this subtler rhythm, where plates neither collide nor break apart, but move past each other, softly shaping the land in tension and time. Not all movements are confrontations. Not every boundary is drawn in fire or uplifted stone. Some are traced in silence, dot and tension dot in the passing of giants side by side. This is the story of transform. Boundaries, where tectonic plates neither collide nor drift apart, but slide past each other, like ancient dancers bound in quiet choreography. Here, the land moves in parallel. Here, the earth doesn't rise or fall, not in mountains or oceans, but in invisible shifts of alignment in locked edges and subtle friction. Imagine two continents slowly brushing shoulders, each following its own path, but so close their edges touch. Now imagine they're made not of silk or skin, but of ancient rock, pressed tightly together. These are the transformed fault lines, and within them lives a hidden strain, a quiet press, a buildup of energy, waiting for release. The most well-known of these is the San Andreas Fault. In California, a long, winding scar where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate drift past one another. They're like tectonic tecton partners in a long, slow sidestep locked together, resisting each other's motion until eventually they slip. That slip, so abrupt, so sudden, is what we feel as an earthquake. But long before the quake ever shakes a city, the ground holds its breath. The plates grind without moving, locked in a grip of tension. Decades, even centuries pauses pressure builds along the fault. Stone rubbing, stone silently. Then, in a moment sometimes, without warning, the energy unravels. The earth exhales what it's held too tightly for too long. Transformed boundaries do not give us chains of mountains, nor the birth of oceans. Their gifts are more subtle and sometimes more dangerous. They give us sudden shifts. Land that has moved 3 meters in 3 seconds. Fences, no longer straight. Roads jogged sideways. Riverbeds that forget where they belong. And yet, when they are silent, when they hold those fault lines, are places of enormous stillness. A stillness that feels solid, but is only a pause. The crust seems unbroken, but underneath, it stretches like a drawn string, tense with stories yet to be told. You could walk across a fault line and never feel it. You might build a city on top of one, a garden. A quiet bench by the sea. And for decades nothing. Until one day, a shiver. It's important to remember that transformed boundaries are not lines of chaos. They're part of Earth's balancing act. Where plates move past rather than through, where strain is stored and gradually, sometimes dramatically, released. Keep the puzzle of the Earth's crust moving, ensuring that the plates don't lock in place forever. That the crust can stretch sideways as well as up and down. That momentum is shared. Many of these faults lie on the ocean floor, cutting across mid-ocean ridges in long, zigzagging lines. From space, they look like scars across the seabed, quiet and ancient. A pathway for plate movement, hidden beneath waves and distance. These faults are not always straight. They bend and branch. Some are split in strands, half a mile apart, intricate braids in stone, each segment with its own story of tension, its own calendar of quiet pressure. And though they often bring earthquakes, they are not to be feared, only understood. They teach us about patience, about pressure, about the way strength becomes fragile when the load goes unshared too long. If you've ever held something heavy for too long, a thought, a sorrow, even a secret, you understand transform boundaries. They hold tension until they can't. The earth, too, has its limits. And sometimes it whispers them in the form of a tremor. But even then, even in its release, it speaks gently, in cycles. Shaking ends, the crust settles, and the plates continue their asymmetrical journey. These aren't places of endings. They are reminders that movement comes in all forms, rising, falling, and slipping sideways beneath awareness. The planet, as always, has not panicked. It shifts. And then it stills. So lie back now and imagine two great plates sliding in silence, neither meeting nor leaving, just moving quietly, inch by inch, beneath. City lights and forest roots. They are not angry. They are not rushing. They are simply part of Earth's hidden rhythm. And deep in the crust, in those slivered spaces between where land doesn't lift, but leans, lies the memory of all we cannot see. But tension, as in life, is not always held forever. And sometimes release comes in unexpected ways. In the next chapter, you'll hear that release. You'll feel it ripple through the landscape, not as destruction, but as reminder that even slow planets need to shift suddenly sometimes. For a planet that moves so slowly, so patiently, the Earth can sometimes speak with startling speed. Most of the time, you walk across quiet ground, the soil soft beneath your feet, the streets unmoved, the stones unmoving, but every so often, in a moment the Earth shifts. And it trembles, like a breath once held too long, a tension finally released. This is the story of an earthquake, not as destruction or fear, but as the planet's slow, steady rhythm suddenly catching up to itself. Beneath, the crust, tectonic plates drift, pushed by deep mantle currents. They glide, they part, they slide, but sometimes they stick. Edges that should move catch against each other, like two stubborn thoughts unwilling to pass, like rusted gears paused by friction. For years, decades, even centuries, these edges remain frozen, building pressure. The rocks bend. They strain. They whisper their fatigue into silent layers. And then, in a heartbeat, they let go. The land snaps. Back to position. And all at once, what was quiet becomes movement. Rocks break. Faults slip. Energy, buried and bound, is released in waves radiating out through the crust like ripples in a pond. And we feel those waves through floorboards, through walls, through bone. This release, quick and sharp, is nature's reminder that stillness can hold weight until it cannot hold any more. It seems sudden to us. And in many ways, it is. But an earthquake is really just the visible tip of a very long process below. Pressure gathers over centuries. Until, without permission, it finds release in seconds. There are different kinds of earthquakes, some shallow and snappy, near the crust's edge, others deep, as if from the planet's core memory. Some roll gently, some strike sharply, rattling buildings and reminding rooftops they're not part of the sky. But all earthquakes are born from the same truth. That tension cannot last forever. Around the globe, fault lines trace the places where quakes are born, cracks in the crust we cannot always see, but which know exactly how much strain they carry. The San Andreas Fault, snaking through California, is a famous example. Its segments slip sideways in what's called strike-slip motion, when two edges slide past like hands, brushing in motion. It hasn't seen its greatest shift in over a century, and scientists gently watch it, patiently listening for signs that the Earth is preparing to speak there again. Across the sea, in the Ring of Fire, earthquakes are felt near subduction zones, where oceanic plates are pulled beneath continental ones. There, the crust bends under pressure. Where it folds, it also fractures. Places like Japan, Chile, and Indonesia feel the earth whisper and roar, more often than most. And yet, their people endure with resilience, learning to live in rhythm with a restless ground. The energy from an earthquake moves in seismic waves, some that roll up and down, others that shear side to side. They travel fast, sometimes across an entire continent, but lose intensity with distance and stone. Seismic reading instruments, called seismographs, capture these waves like a needle drawing a heartbeat. And in those lines and curves, we see the Earth's voice, not in sound, but in movement. We measure quakes in magnitude, how much energy they release. 4.0 nudges your table. A 7.0 stirs the very shape of your day. And occasionally, a quake is so large, so deep, The entire axis of the earth shifts, if only by inches. Some earthquakes arrive gently. A soft swaying dot like being on a train that hasn't quite stopped. Others strike without whisper or warning. They make the ground feel liquid dot, make the air hush. They can shake buildings, topple cliffs, shift rivers dot, but they don't mean harm. They are part of the earth's pressure and release cycle one. That's as old as land itself. Even mountains feel them. Whole ranges tremblayas, if remembering the tension that helped raise them. What's more, some quakes don't occur all at once. They tremble in aftershock. A softer echo that follows the main event like a tale of memory dot. And then, eventually, the earth sleeps again. For a while. Until the next moment when trapped energy meets its threshold in motion unfolds again from deep within the crust. But this trembling is not only told in measurement dot, it's also felt. In people's stories dot in cups that clatter, dot in sidewalks that shift, dot in hands that reach for loved ones bore. The world settles again. Dot, it's in the breath you hold when the room moves, and the breath you release when all becomes still again. If you've experienced an earthquake, you know that time stretches oddly during it. Seconds feel thick. The air becomes aware. Even the birds go quiet. This awe, this fear, this reverence is truly just the body, remembering it rides something alive dot. So what's to be learned in this sudden shiver of a slow planet? That pressure needs an outlet. That even stone can only bear so much tension. That silence isn't always stillness. And when the earth stirs, it's not because it wants to frighten, but because it must reset its balance. Dot, it teaches us resilience, that patience, that preparation dot, and respect for the land. Beneath us this ancient baying woe, only now and then reminds. Use that it, too, must breathe, must readjust, must move dot in few places. Is this more evident than along plate boundaries known for earthquakes? But even stable ground can speak suddenly, for faults run deep, and not every story is mapped dot, so you may close your eyes tonight and feel grateful that your walls are steady, that your bed cradles you gently, that the earth, for now, is quiet where you sleep. But always, it listens to its balance. Sometimes, its breath moves upward and raises mountains. Sometimes it parts the seas dot, and sometimes it simply shivers. But the story doesn't end with the quake, because not every outpouring from within is invisible. Sometimes, the earth expresses its pressure through fire rising, glowing, erupting through crusto, remind us that it is molten beneath. That story of lava, magma, pressure, and fire awaits you in the next glowing chapter, where the earth breathes not in shifts, but in flame. The earth is a vessel of quiet intensity. Its surface solid, seemingly still rests upon layers filled with movement and heat dot far beneath your feet. Deep under stone and pressure flows a molten heart. And sometimes, this heat finds its voice, cracks. Open dot stone gives way dot, and the earth breathes out fire. This breath takes the form of a volcano, a mountain made not by folding or faulting, but by inner fire pushing outward, layer upon layer. Volcanoes are the lungs of Earth's deep interior, exhaling warmth, pressure, and new creation with each eruption, not all at once, but slowly, sometimes gently, sometimes suddenly. Their stories begin beneath the crust, where temperatures rise and rocks do not stay solid dot in the mantle. Certain pockets are hotter, richer in rising energy dot here. Rock begins to melt into magma thick, glowing liquid full of minerals, gas, and possibility dot. This magma is lighter than the rock around it, so it rises slow at first, weaving upward through fractures and fault lines. Searching for space dot, sometimes it finds a chamber, a hidden pocket, just below the surface, where heat gathers and pressure builds dot. Then, when the surface can no longer contain it, the earth opens, and the magma is released into the open world dot in. That moment, it becomes lava dot, Not just molten rock, but Earth's radiant breath, spilled onto the ground. This is an eruption. Some eruptions are soft, a gentle flow, steady and glowing, like honey poured from the planet's core. Others are violent gases trapped in viscous magma explode outward, sending ash, fire, and fury into the sky. But whether calm or catastrophic, volcanoes are one of the Earth's most creative acts, for they build, even as they burn. They build. They give rise to islands like Hawaii. A chain formed slowly over millions of years, be a hotspot, a deep stationary source of magma that pierced the ocean floor and kept flowing upward as the plate above drifted slowly westward. Each island in the Hawaiian chain is the ghost of volcanic breath, one that created a home above the waves where once there was only ocean. Other volcanoes form at convergent boundaries, where one plate dives beneath another in what we call subduction zones. The descending plate melts deep below, and the magma rises back up to form fiery arcs, like the Andes in South America, or the volcanoes circling the Pacific Ring of Fire. At times, volcanoes even form along divergent boundaries. In the middle of oceans, where plates pull appertain, magma seeps out from the ridges, quietly building new seafloor year by year. Each type is different, but they share the same origin: pressure, heat, and release. The cycle is as ancient as the planet itself. Volcanoes are often feared, and understandably so. They reshape landscapes. In ours, they bury towns in ash, darken skies with pyroclastic fury, and set fire to what once felt safe. But destruction is not the whole story. Volcanoes nourish as much as they take. Their lava, once cooled, becomes fertile soil rich in minerals that feed forests, vineyards, and fields. Whole civilizations have risen beside volcanoes, drawn by the abundance the land provides. And so we live near them, watch them, learn their signs. Rumbles. Gas releases, a bulge in the mountain's shape, a spike in temperature, or tremors small and frequent. Modern science gives us tools to speak with the volcano before it speaks louder. And yet, even with all our instruments, we never fully know its timing. It remains a mystery we approach with reverence, because these mountains hold the deep past. Ancient, Earth breathes out through them, not in chaos, but in cycles. They mark beginnings too. The first atmosphere of Earth, some scientists believe, was shaped not by biology, but by volcanic outgassing, a slow release of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and other gases that formed the air we breathe. Now, volcanoes make land. They enrich oceans with nutrients. They create geothermal energy, offering warmth from below without flame. And they remind us that change is part of life on this planet. Nothing stays frozen in time. Volcanoes are time-embodied stone that flows, land that forgets stillness. And from these flows, we gain islands, mountains, lakes and craters, black sand beaches, hot springs that steam under starlight. Even their silence is a kind of speech. A dormant volcano is not dormant forever. It waits, breathes slowly, dreams beneath the surface. The ground may feel cool above, may nest on its slope. Trees may root in its ancient paths of lava, and yet, deep below, the fire sleeps and stirs. Some volcanoes erupt once, then rest for millennia. Others whisper and steam in cycles we don't yet fully grasp. And some decide, without warning, to speak once again, reminding the world that the Earth is, above all, alive. Yet even in their wildest fire, there is beauty. The lava lamp flow of Hawaii's gentle eruptions, or the eerie ash twilight of Iceland's far northern skies, each event a strange ballet between destruction and renewal, heat and silence. And when the lava cools, it hardens into basalt, obsidian, or pumice rocks with trapped bubbles. Records of the gases they carried. Memories, frozen in black dots. So too can we carry memory from these places, not just tailings of smoke and flame, but of emergence. Of Earth telling us, I am here. Still making, still reshaping. And perhaps, within these moments, there is a kind of poetry, because the volcano does not erupt constantly. It builds toward it. Just like we do. Their emotion. Hold, tension, contain fire inside us to the creativity, the warmth, the pressure to express, and one day, we too must release it. Speak. Shape. Create. The volcano shows us the beauty of breathing fire when it's time to let go. Even the earth knows how to exhale its truth. So rest tonight knowing that the crust beneath your pillow has stories written in heat. The land you live on may have been formed in flame, melted, lifted, rippled into shape, then cooled and calmed. And while it sleeps now, it still holds the glow somewhere deep inside. But even the fire breath of earth needs balance. For every eruption, every tremble, there is a calmer truth, a soft renewal, hidden deep beneath the ocean. Because something silent happens on the seafloor, the crust expands. And then begins to sink. Where does all this new earth go? The answer lies not in the eruption, but in the return, in the deep, watery rhythm of subduction. Beneath the vast blue mirror of the sea, the earth moves silently. There are no footsteps on this floor, no footprints etched in stone, yet this world is far from still. The ocean floor, hidden deep beneath miles of water, is in constant, unhurried motion. It grows. It stretches. And then, when its time is done, it disappears back into the earth's embrace. This, too, is the work of plate tectonics, only here. Beneath the oceans, the process takes on a different rhythm. A breath in, a breath out. A quiet cycle of generation and return that begins at the center of the oceans, where mid-ocean ridges rise like submarine mountains that stretch, like stitching along the planet's watery belly. Places like the mid-Atlantic ridge, where magma rises from the mantle below, slow, steady, soft in its insistence. It cools as it touches seawater, forming new crust right there on the ocean bottom. This is called seafloor spreading. Every year, a few centimeters of fresh crust are born here, a gentle widening, silent and unseen. You might think of it as the earth's skin expanding slowly outward, layer by layer, like tree rings in reverse. As the new crust forms, the older crust is pushed away from the ridge, sliding quietly across the ocean floor, like pages being turned over time. But this spreading can't go on forever. Earth does not inflate. It balances. So while one part of the crust is expanding, another part must return. A full inhale must come with a steady exhale. That exhale happens at subduction zones, deep, oceanic trenches, where one plate is gently pulled beneath another, like tucking the edges of a giant blanket back inside the folds. The ocean floor sinks, slipping slowly into the hot mantle below. Here, the dense, colder oceanic crust dives under a continental or younger oceanic plate, melting as it sinks into the depths. This is subduction, an elegant word for the slow recycling of Earth's surface. The Mariana Trench, the deepest place on the planet, is one such subduction zone, nearly 11 kilometers deep, a chasm in the Pacific, where crust disappears from sight, returning to the place from which it may have once arisen. From birth at Regesto, death in trenches, the ocean floor lives a long, quiet life, slowly journeying from its source to its sink over the course of millions of years. There is no urgency in this process. Piece of ocean crust might spend 180 million years drifting silently across the seafloor before it finally subducts. And yet, it does so as part of a perfect balance. A system where nothing piles up forever, where nothing is wasted, even in geology, especially. In geology, there is renewal. You can think of the crust like a great conveyor belt, slowly moving new rock outward, then feeding the old rock back into the deep. With this motion, mountains are built, volcanoes are sparked, islands thrust up, quakes are stirred. But beneath it all is something beautifully simple, a planet that knows. How to begin again. Even the continents ride these motions. Their positions shift over, millennia beds of the oceanic crust growing and shrinking beneath them. Without subduction, the earth would bloat with newly formed crust until balance was broken. But with it, the earth breathes evenly. Creation, matched with absorption. Stone, turned back into molten memory. In the deep ocean trenches. This sinking is invisible, a quiet surrender. Crust. Resisting, but following gravity's long curve home. As the sea floor descends, it heats, compresses, and begins to melt. It may rise again one day as magma, fueling volcanoes above the subduction zone. A long, quiet loop of stone becoming fire, becoming stone again. Even now, as you lie still, somewhere beneath the Pacific, a slab of basalt is folding into the earth, disappearing inch by inch into warmth, into transformation. And above it, new crust is being born again in the mid-Atlantic. Age, balanced by youth. The crust of the Atlantic Ocean is relatively young. As it continues to spread outward from the ridges, slowly forming wider expanses of sea. In contrast, much of the Pacific's crust is older and is being drawn back into the mantle through deep trenches. This is why the Pacific isn't simply the biggest ocean, it's also the most dynamic one in terms of tectonic change. It is both expiring and renewing, fading and rising. And in this gentle recycling of ocean crust, the earth preserves its shape. It avoids too much pressure, too much buildup by constantly folding part of itself back down. There is something deeply peaceful about this. An ancient reminder that even stone yields, even earth paces itself, even the hardest matter knows how to release, to let go, to begin again, and perhaps we can learn something from that. Subduction is not sad. It is sacred. It is the balancing breath, the inward inhale that complements each outward exhale of molten rock. So when you imagine the ocean, don't just think of waves and wind. Think of the world beneath the waves, of crust gliding slowly, steadily, born in heat, surrendering in silence. The ocean floor is not flat, not still, not permanent. It is alive in ways too slow to see, but not too slow to matter. And from this constant movement comes a shifting world above, new lands, reshaped coastlines, and the subtle drift of continents across the deep blue canvas. We ride these motions every day, standing on continents carried by oceans that themselves are learning how to let go and begin again. But where do these drifting lands come from? And how did the continents, scattered and vast, once fit together as one? The next chapter drifts further, still tracing the paths of floating continents and the memory of a world that once was whole. Try to picture the world as it once what yesterday, not a century ago, but more than 200 million years in the past. There are no cities, no footprints, no familiar borders. The air is thick, the world is hot. And all the continents, those vast, immovable giants today are gathered together into one enormous landmass, a supercontinent. Its name is Pangaea. This is where our story of continental drift begins. A tale not of sudden separation, but of slow parting, of a world that once embraced itself and has been quietly letting go ever since. Pangaea wasn't the first supercontinent, and it will not be the last, but it is the one that left behind the most vivid clues, fossils scattered across far coasts, mountain chains cleaved in perfect halves, and coastlines that still seem to want to belong to each other. Look at the shapes of South America and Africa. Trace the edges with your eye. They still fit like puzzle pieces pulled part by time. Their match is no coincidence. They were once joined, and though oceans now stretch between them, the stones still remember. The idea of continental drift was first proposed by a man named Alfred Wegener in the early 1900s. He wasn't a geologist, but he saw patterns in rocks, in fossils, in the shape of the world. He suggested the continents were once united and that they slowly drifted apart over millions of years. He had no proof of how this happened, no way to see the plates or the mantle below dot, but he saw enough to ask the question. The clue, he said, was in the fossils. Fossils of a lizard-like creature called Mesosaurusware, found in both South America and Africa, despite the oceans now separating them. Too far for it to have swum, too delicate to have traveled. The only explanation? These lands were once one, and the creature walked freely across what would become distant continents. Wegener's ideas were dismissed, at first not too strange, too unprovable, but over time, the evidence accumulated. Rocks of the same age and species on opposite coasts, matching mountain ranges separated by an ocean. Ancient glacial patterns found on continents today resting in the tropics. And then, in the mid-20th century, the final piece was uncovered, the movement of the tectonic plates themselves, with the discovery of seafloor, spreading in the understanding of plate tectonics. Wegener's slow dream caught the wind. Continents do drift, not because they move on their own, but because they are passengers, carried on the slow-moving plates that glide atop the mantle. This movement isn't fast. Your fingernails grow faster. Some continents move just a few centimeters each year, but over millions of years? That's enough to split oceans, collide land masses, raise mountains, and reshape the face of Earth again and again. Think of North America, slowly edging away from Europe. Australia drifting north, toward Asia. India, once an island adrift, speeding northward into the underbelly of Eurasia, lifting the Himalayas skyward as it arrived. This dance is never random. Each continent follows its own quiet current, a slow wander across the planet's surface. It's not just the shape of continents that changed. Climates, too, shifted as the land moved. Antarctica wasn't always covered in snow and silence. Long ago, it rested in warmer latitudes, lush with forests and freshwater lakes. The fossilized remains of ancient plants still rest under its ice. A reminder, even the coldest places were once green. The continents, you see, carry their pasts with them. Before humans drew lines and borders on maps, the land had its own journey, and it continues still. Right now, beneath your home, the ground is underway. Every place you've known, every city, forest, and coastline is slowly changing latitude, shifting position, altering orientation, drifting into the future. The Atlantic Ocean, for example, is widening every year. The Americas move incrementally farther from Europe and Africa. Meanwhile, the Pacific Ocean is shrinking. Its floor, heavy with age, is subducting at far-flung trenches, pulling continents slowly together. Not how long, you might ask, until the continents meet again? In a few 100 million years, give or take, a new supercontinent will likely form. Scientists debate where and how, perhaps circling the equator, perhaps gathered at the edge of the shrinking Pacific. They call these imagined futures names like Pangaea Proxima, Vision of Reunion, written in stone and time. Because the Earth, like a breathing being, follows cycles. Just as crust forms and subducts, continents too come together, break apart, come together again in a slow, graceful rhythm stretching. Over billions of years. It is the planet's long inhale and exhale. Perhaps the most humbling part? Not how slowly it all happens, but how much has already happened while we were unaware. Mountains rising, oceans opening, lands that once touched becoming strangers. And yet the Earth remembers. Geologists, like gentle detectives, read these memories in ancient rocks, in magnetic patterns frozen in lava, in shorelines matched across seas, in fossils that refuse to lie. And we, living just a blink in geological time, get to witness this quiet drift in small ways. GPS satellites even measure plate movement, now tiny. Steady changes, so precise you could chart their motion across a human lifetime. It reminds us, stillness is not the absence of motion, it is the patience of motion. So next time you look at a world map, don't see fixed continents. See paths. See movement. See the earth halfway through a story. Are here to read and walk upon. And wonder. Perhaps, if land can drift gently apart over millions of years, what do the rivers remember? The forests? The animals? What does it mean to move without hurrying? To shift an entire world during sleep? And where will it go next? Because land shapes more than geography. It shapes evolution itself. The separation of continents divided ecosystems, splitting life into isolated chapters, carving new paths for what we now call biodiversity. In the next chapter, we look not only at stone and soil, but at the living beings shaped by drifting ground. Not just how the planet moves, but how life moves with it. Tectonics is not just the story of rocks. It is the story of life. For every plate that moved, every mountain that rose, every ocean that opened, life was watching. Life was changing. Life was finding new ways to begin. The restless crust beneath our feet has quietly guided evolution since life first crawled ashore. It has created barriers and bridges, separated species and united them, and painted the backdrop on which every living thing has danced, flown, swum, and wandered. There is a hidden poetry to that the motions of the deepest mineral shaped the feathers of a bird, the fins of a fish, the footsteps of you. Let's go back again to Pangaea. This great supercontinent held nearly all of Earth's dry land in a single mass. Across its sweeping plains, early reptiles roamed, primitive forests under purple skies, rivers without names. But when Pangaea broke apart, it didn't just split the land, it split ecosystems. Families of animals were divided by oceans that hadn't existed a moment before. In geologic time, species that once shared common ancestors suddenly found themselves in separate worlds. Over millions of years, they followed different paths, different climates, different challenges. And from these separations, new species emerged. This process is called allopatric speciation, when life diverges because land does. A single population, divided by shifting plates, becomes 2, then 4, then many, each shaped by a different idea of survival. This is how tectonics shaped life. Marsupials, for instance, once roamed across Gondwana, the southern supercontinent made of what would become South America, Africa, Antarctica, and Australia. When Gondwana began to drift apart, so too did its life. In South America, the marsupials were eventually overtaken by placental mammals. But in Australia, isolated and remote, they survived. And not only survived, they flourished. Kangaroos, koalas, wombats, all descendants of this splitting, all children of continental drift. Birds, too, trace their migrations not just in flight, but in ancient lands once connected. Flightless birds like ostriches, emus, and kiwis exist on distant continents that were once joined. Before the plates let them go. Even the tiny lemurs of Madagascar are part of this tale. That island separated from Africa millions of years ago, cutting off its life from the mainland. There, in isolation, lemurs evolved with no predators, an entire branch of life shaped quietly by plate tectonics. Rising mountains also encouraged evolution. The Andes, the Himalayas, the Alps, not only monumental feats of geology, but habitats that changed everything. For life, increased altitude creates new environments. Cold air, thin oxygen, dramatic weather. Plants and animals adapted, some climbing higher, others retreating to valleys, creating biodiversity zones along slopes like layered ecosystems. From hummingbirds in the cloud, foresto snow leopards in high passes. These creatures exist because mountains were once folded into being. Whole climates shifted as continents drifted, and with climate, Life evolved again. When India collided with Asia and raised the Himalayas, it also changed global wind patterns, creating monsoons in South Asia and drying other regions into deserts. Shifts in land lead to shifts in weather, and weather decides which seeds sprout, which animals survive. The stories run deep, even into the ocean. As continents rearranged, entire seas closed and opened. Currents changed course. Water chemistry evolved. Species that had thrived in one salinity or temperature faced extinction or adaptation. Coral reefs migrated. Ancient whales lost legs. The oceans themselves followed the long conversation of the land, even the spread of humans. Our ancestors was shaped by tectonics. Africa was once more connected to lush corridors leading out into the world. Then land bridges opened and closed. Ice ages built up water in glaciers, lowering sea levels, then melted again. Our migration into Europe, Asia, and the Americas was mapped partly by the slow shape and reshaping of the continents we walked on. The Great Rift Valley in East Africa, formed by tectonic forces splitting the continent apart, is where many early hominin fossils have been found, suggesting tectonics may not only have shaped biodiversity, but may have directed the evolution of our species. In the big picture, we are not separate from the land beneath us. We are expressions of it. From your spine to your shadow, your biology remembers where the plates have been. Soil richness, rainfall, patterns, plant evolution, migration routes, geography itself all echo tectonic motion. Even now, tectonics continues to shape the future of life. As continents draw closer or separate, further new pathways will open. Others will vanish. Species may crash together in competition. Or be protected in isolation. Climate will continue to dance with crustal motion, and life will write its next chapter on a surface that has never been still. And maybe that's not just a natural truth, but a hopeful one, that from disturbance comes pattern, from motion comes possibility. From division comes diversity. All your favorite flowers, forests, and animals are here partly because the ground has wandered underneath them. It reminds us that change is not the interruption of life. It is its designer. Just as the continents took their time to drift, just as life evolved slowly in their wake, so too can we learn to live with patience, with curiosity. With movement. You may look out now at the land and see it as fixed. But beneath it lies the blueprint of a life that has always adapted. Trees leaning with prevailing winds, birds shaped by winds that cross old SEAWAY. Born from migratory paths and mingled air, the stones and bones are not so different. And when you walk, know that you tread upon ancient travelers, continents that have carried rainforests, deserts, glaciers, and gardensto where you now live. They are still carrying you. But tectonics doesn't only connect land to life, it connects people to shared soils, shared roots. Our migrations trace the paths of plates. What seems distant, now Asia and America, Africa and South America was once united. And maybe again. The next chapter steps back softly, pulling the threads of stone, fire, and life together. In reflection, what does it mean to live on a planet that breathes? What does it mean to ride that breath with gentleness? We'll close our journey with the quiet knowing. The earth is not simply solid. Beneath us. The earth is alive. And it is breathing. The ground beneath you feels so certain. It holds your home, your forests, your footsteps. It does not sway with tides, nor drift like clouds. It seems still. But stillness, on this planet, is rarely what it seems. Even stone has its rhythm. Even silence has its breath. If you could stretch your perception step out of days and into eons, you would see the surface of the earth undulating like the chest of a breathing giant. A long inhale, a longer exhale, a pulse that moves at the pace of mountains and oceans. This is tectonics, the Earth's slow, deep breathing, a breath made not of air, but of motion, each plate drifting calmly across the mantle, each ridge rising quietly beneath, the sea. Each fold in a mountain range, a line in the Earth's breathing pattern. You have walked upon this breath all your life, from your first step on a grassy hilltop, the solid pavement beneath your city walk. You have been riding the slow exhale of a living planet. Every inch of crust, from the deepest trench to the tallest peak, once came to be through movement. The continents that feel fixed have quietly shifted. Like thoughts as the planet dreamed. The Earth has no need to hurry. Time is not a clock in its keeping. It is a landscape. Just as your chest rises and falls without conscious thought, the planet moves without permission, without beginning or end. It folds. It flows. It reshapes, not because it must, but because that is what life does, even in stone. This rhythm is ancient. Before birds had wings, before seeds had roots, before even light touched continents in the way we now understand it, the Earth had already learned to move. And though the process is invisible to your daily senses, you are more connected to it than you may know. Think of the minerals in your bones. They were once locked in mountain chains. Think of the salt on your skin. It may have come from ancient seas lifted high by tectonic forces, then ground slowly down by wind and reef until it reached the shore once more. You are formed, in part, by the cycles of a moving world. You are not simply on the Earth. You are of it. And just as the planet breathes in time, making space and closing space, you, too, have your own pattern of return. Breath in, breath out. Movement. Stillness. Tension. Release. To live on Earth is to join in this slow rhythm. To walk forward, knowing that the ground itself has walked before you. You may never feel it shift, but it is always in conversation, ridge to trench, crust to mantle, continent to core. Tectonics is not chaos. It is not destruction. It is creation in its most patient form. It gave us oceans and volcanoes, deserts and deltas, valleys where seeds gather, and highlands where snow keeps ancient memory. It split animals into new species. It guided wind and rainfall. It taught life to adapt and to endure. And now, it carries cities with the same ease. It once carried forests. It bears towers as it once bore trees. It holds our history in the very rock we build with. In every brick is an origin. Story may be lava, may be limestone, may be sand once shaped by mountain. Collapse. You press your hands to walls, your feet to floorboards. But beneath it all is a crust that remembers it. Lay beneath the oceans long before we sailed them. This is not something to fear. It is something to feel. Like a heartbeat so slow, it becomes the song of the planet. And when you pause long enough, when your senses grow quiet beneath the noise of everyday life, you may just feel it, the subtle strength of it. You may realize that what feels still is always alive, that the world below is not frozen, but unfolding, that the shape of today is not permanent, but perfectly temporary. No mountain range is eternal. No coastline is final. Even the highest peak will one day diminish, and the flattest basin may rise in reply. This does not diminish beauty. It deepens it. For the world, like you, is always becoming, never quite finished, always breathing toward its next form. And perhaps that's what makes it sacred. Its willingness to shift. To rest, then rise. To give birth to islands and watch them erode again. To fold centuries into slow, deliberate change. From fire and pressure, from deep time and deep stillness, Earth remakes itself not once, but always. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts grow quiet, you can imagine the world beneath you, its vast plates gliding gently over molten breath. They do not rush. They do not sleep. They simply move. Together. In rhythm. And in this long, geologic breath, there is no right direction, only flow, no true center, only balance. You are part of it, not separate. Not above, but within. Your body, made from crust and ocean and breath, is a brief echo of a very long song. The earth breathes beneath you now, not to shake you or shape you, but to remind you. Stillness lives inside motion, and silence lives inside. Becoming. And so we end not with a period, but a pause. Not with a final word, but a long, slow exhale. The earth is breathing. You feel it, even now, and you, too, are breathing in time.